Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. I'm Alana Cohn-Kennedy, the Chief Operating Officer at the Holocaust Center. We have an excellent program for you today. Today's program is the first of 5 in the series Embracing Our Humanity and Diversity, sponsored by Verizon. Most of us feel like we know white nationalism when we see or hear it, but we don't always know how to respond. Today's program is going to give us some insight and tools to use. I want to tell you first about a frustrating experience I had with this program. I'm going to guess that most of you heard about this program from an email. The event is posted on the Holocaust Center social media pages, and last week I boosted the event. If there's ever information people need, it's this. When you boost an event, you pay a small amount to have it show up on people's feeds. This weekend, I received a message from Facebook saying my request had been rejected because it, quote, mentions politicians or is about sensitive social issues that could influence public opinion, how people vote, and may impact the outcome of an election or pending legislation. I'm baffled and a bit infuriated. How in the world is confronting white nationalism a political issue or something we want to avoid? This is not about politics. This is about ethics, racism, and humanity. Perhaps Facebook is overcorrecting a problem it has long struggled with, the explosion of racism and bigotry perpetuated by social media platforms. However, after several days and a review process, the event was finally approved just last night. I tell you this because this is an uphill battle that makes our work and our determination to fight hate all the more critical. We know that you are tuning into this program because you want to learn, you want to respond, and you are here because, like us, you believe that it all makes a difference. Lunch and Learn friends, please consider joining us in just over 1 month at our Voices for Humanity fundraiser event and help us to continue this work. The program is on November 8th at the Sheraton in Seattle, or you can join virtually. The funds raised make these programs possible and support our work throughout the year. We have a special table set up for you, our Lunch and Learn guests. There's a link in the chat for more information and to register. We would love to see you there and are grateful for any support. When you register, look for the field called Event Host, and you will see an option for Lunch and Learn guests. You can also add it to the notes section. In Holocaust history, we often hear about the Danish people protecting their Jewish population, but rarely do we hear about the great efforts of the Muslim Albanians who created false documents and hid their Jewish neighbors. From October 23rd to December 13th, the Holocaust Center will be hosting a special exhibit that profiles some of the Muslim Albanians who, at great risk, defied the Nazis and protected the Jewish people in their community. The remarkable efforts of these Muslim Albanians was grounded in the concept of besa, a code of honor which still today serves as the highest ethical code in the country. This exhibit is sponsored by the American Society of Yad Vashem. You can plan your visit to the Holocaust Center, we're putting a link in the chat, and see the exhibit starting on October 23rd. With us today is Nora Flanagan. Nora has been teaching high school English in the Chicago Public Schools for 25 years and currently serves on the Illinois Holocaust and Genocide Education Commission. After initially encountering emergent hate groups in her community as a teenager, Nora now researches and organizes against white nationalism as a senior fellow with the Western States Center, a Portland-based nonprofit working to support inclusive democracy and confront bigotry nationwide. Most recently, this work has involved speaking to educators, community groups, government agencies, and media outlets about the intersection of bigotry and youth culture. She co-authored Confronting White Nationalism in Schools, a toolkit designed to help schools thoughtfully and effectively respond to incidents of racial hostility and proactively strengthen school communities. This project has been featured in the Washington Post, the New York Times, PBS NewsHour, NPR, the Chicago Tribune, and other outlets, as well as conferences and panels across the country. For today's program, the chat will be open and we encourage your participation. You can find the chat box at the bottom of your screen, open it up and get ready to type. We will also have time for Q&A at the end of the program, and you can add your questions into the Q&A feature on Zoom at any time. Nora, it's an honor to have you with us here today to talk about this critical issue. Thank you so much for joining us after a busy school day in Chicago.
Thank you very much. Can we all hear me okay? Yes? Wonderful. I really am coming off of a day of teaching teenagers here in Chicago. You can see all my Chicago flags behind me. This is my actual classroom, not a fun Zoom background. And as I am a real live today teacher, don't leave me hanging in the chat. I really, really do want to hear your questions, your concerns, what you're seeing and hearing, and how we can potentially send out additional resources after this event to support you in your communities. So any teacher who's taught remotely knows that a silent chat is not our friend. Anyway, good afternoon. Greetings from Chicago. I'm going to be taking you through a slide deck and a discussion of our work around confronting white nationalism in schools, both as it existed when we first published the toolkit in 2019, and as it exists today, as we are preparing to release a third edition in the very near future, because as you might imagine, a few things have happened and a few things have changed since we first published. So I am going to start screen sharing to take you through my deck, but I'm going to keep an eye on the chat and answer questions as I go. But as we said, we'll have space at the end as well. Can we see my deck okay? Sweet. Okay, keeping an eye on the chat. Yay, thank you. Okay. So what I would first like to know, and this is, I'm testing that whole chat request I just made of you. If you don't mind, could we drop into the chat your general location, city, or even just your state, and one thing that you are hoping to learn more about today if you're coming into this session with a question or a concern? So I'm going to take note of them and see if we can get to all of them. Ooh, Pacific Northwest people. Yay, Arizona. Oh, Miami, wow. Hey, there's someone from Chicago. Hi, Chicago. Very cool. I love seeing where people come from for these sessions. Evansville, Indiana, neighbor. Chicago burbs. Ooh, Lisa, if you don't mind me saying so, the Chicago burbs have been busy with this work lately. Things have been blowing up in the Chicago area, but things have kind of been escalating everywhere. So I am so glad to see so many folks from all over the country. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful. We literally have people coast to coast. I see you, Brooklyn. Thank you. And David, I agree that it is strange that we don't cover this more often in every possible medium. It's actually challenging to get coverage. As Ilana was introducing me and listing all of the publications that have covered the toolkit, our toolkit got more traction and attention than we ever could have hoped or dreamed of. And it's good and bad at the same time, because we're glad this resource is getting out there. We're glad it's supporting people. We're glad it's resonating. But it's heartbreaking how often we hear of incidents of white nationalist signaling or organizing around school communities. So I'm really glad everybody's here. I'm really glad that there's interest in our toolkit, but wow, do I wish we didn't need it. All right, I'm gonna get rolling with our slide deck. Hang on. Okay, here's our goals today. I want, and some of you may already have this information, some of you might be square one, so we're gonna pace as needed. We first need a foundational knowledge of what white nationalism means and how it differs, according to how a lot of folks define it, from white supremacy, because those terms are used interchangeably and they both come with baggage, and they can be complicated to bring into the discourse if we're not clear on how they've been used. We also want to take a look at some of the standard rhetoric and strategies, some of the ways that white nationalist groups infiltrate, some of the ways they approach school communities, some of the ways they rebrand and camouflage themselves to seem like not white nationalism, Currently, the trend is parent rights groups, and we'll talk a little about how parent rights groups is a really recent and kind of insidious rebranding. We also want to contextualize the backlash to this work. We're going to talk about common responses to confronting white nationalism, some of the ways people will defend it and how we can speak back to that. And I would love if everybody left with one idea of what you can do or something you can look into more to address what you're seeing and hearing about in your own communities. So let's do this. First, tiny brief introduction, in addition to what's already been said. I'm a senior fellow at the Western State Center, which is a Portland-based organization that supports democracy and grassroots organizing against bigotry in all forms. How did a Chicago girl get involved with a Portland-based organization? The previous executive director is a longtime friend, and I affectionately call a co-conspirator of mine, Eric Ward. And so Eric Ward and I collaborated with a couple of other educators and a project manager to get the toolkit published. And I've been doing a lot more work in and around the Pacific Northwest since. So thank you again for having me. But by day, yeah, I'm a high school teacher. So first, let's define a couple terms. I'm keeping an eye on the questions in the chat too and making a couple notes. I'm doing that teacher multitasking. White supremacy generally refers to a belief system and accumulated structural power that benefits white people. White supremacy assumes superiority of white people and otherizes everybody else. In italics at the bottom of the slide, it's important to take a sec. Racial animus, especially conscious racial animus, is not a necessary factor in perpetuating white supremacy. White supremacy is a system. We are living in it, we are soaking in it, whether we acknowledge it or not. We don't have to acknowledge it, let alone actively perpetuate it for it to be there. It's there, it's the water. I have a map of Seattle here, and I know the key is really tiny, but the colors on this map indicate levels of desirability according to realtors and banks. And I could show you a near identical map of Chicago from around the same time. This map is essentially the foundation of redlining. Any of us who've grown up in a major city have grown up among this kind of system that financially and economically and politically benefits white people. Again, we don't need to consciously admit that it's there for it to be there. It's there. I left the source for this map, but anybody who's interested in it, let me know and I can send you that article link. White nationalism, on the other hand, is a movement. It originated in the 1960s as a response to the civil rights era, but by the 90s, coinciding with the emergence of some prominent white supremacist groups in the United States, there was an ideology that started to crystallize around the creation of all white ethno-states and deeply rooted in anti-Semitism. Here's a quote from my co-conspirator, Eric Ward, that I like to put some focus on. White nationalists are not just trying to spread hate. It is not just about hating people. They are trying to seize the state. One of the ways that we simplify the difference in the use of these two terms, white supremacy is a system. White nationalism has policy goals. And we see the policy goals of white nationalism in things like a Muslim ban, in rhetoric around building a wall. We see it now in the absolute explosion of transphobia in recent years. It's all about who this country is for and efforts toward that end. White nationalism is also deeply rooted, as I mentioned, in anti-Semitism. These roots go back 100 years before we even used white nationalism as a term, and we can still hear them. There's a governor's race in Illinois right now where the anti-Semitic dog whistles against our incumbent governor are getting really loud. White nationalism frames multicultural democracy as a threat to white families. This is where we start to hear it in the parents' rights groups, when we talk about protecting the children and preserving the family. And this is a callback to 80s homophobia. Anytime we're talking about saving and protecting the family, we're talking about a very particular kind of family, and that family is white. We're also seeing, I'm sure a lot of you have noticed, a resurgence of the Great Replacement theory. And when I say resurgence, I don't mean in dark corners of the internet, I mean on major media outlets. It also trades in, and I saw Dr. Gibson's question in the chat just now. Well-timed, Dr. Gibson, thank you. Trades in misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, and anti-immigration. This is where we see pushback against comprehensive sexual education. This is where we see pushback against SEL or social emotional learning in schools. Anything that can be seen as a threat to the traditional heteronormative, quote unquote, nuclear white family is a danger. So that's all, it's kind of a web of pushback. We can talk more about that in a bit. And lastly, and comprehensively, seeks to build political power. They are, when we talk about a big tent, they're aiming for a big tent, and white nationalists will call people under their tent based on whatever their particular anxiety might be. The transphobic, parent rights groups will be the first and loudest to say, I don't have a racist bone in my body. I just don't want, gender ideology in school. Yeah, but we're all under the same tent there, and they're all working towards the same goals. I got a note to talk for a second about Great Replacement theory. So let me step back and clarify that for anyone who's not familiar. Great Replacement theory is, again, deeply rooted in anti-Semitism. It's the idea that white people in this country are not just coincidentally or naturally in some way being replaced, but that it is a plot against white people and white culture. Whether it was the theories in the 1960s that the civil rights movement was bankrolled by wealthy Jewish bankers, or the idea that anytime someone mentions George Soros, bells should go off next to your head, because that's kind of that modern dog whistle. Just an idea that Jewish people are behind the replacement of white people in America for political and economic purposes. If this sounds wild, well, yeah, but I've been blown away by how widely accepted it is across a lot of our country. The replacement theory has been touted loudly and long on Fox News over the last year or two, and it's not getting quieter. So as I said, we're hearing a lot of it, excuse me, in Illinois, because our incumbent Democratic governor is Jewish. Oh, Teddy Roosevelt and race suicide. Yeah, that's true. It's more than 100 years old. Thank you. I'm going to scoot on to the next slide, but keep putting questions in the chat, and my co-facilitators, if I miss something that I should go back to, please ping me on that too. How serious? Why are we talking about this with kids? 12-year-olds don't watch Fox News, thank goodness, but youth remain a primary target for hate group recruitment. It's fertile ground. Why young kids? They're looking for identity. They're looking for belonging. They're looking for empowerment. They're looking for their voices to be important. And here is a movement that very disingenuously promises them all of those things. And if we're being honest, does a pretty good job packaging what a lot of kids are looking for. And when we look at the last 3 years, when we look at kids living in a pandemic, we'll talk about that on the next slide, we find that there's especially fertile ground. And if we combine that with what some of our young people do hear outside of school, whether it's from mass media or things they see online or things they hear at home sometimes, kids are vulnerable, and recruitment escalates quickly. As I say on the slide, entertain, envelop, and escalate, and they will come at them from some pretty disturbing angles. We know some of the obvious ones. Gaming platforms, if you don't, actually, I shouldn't say it's obvious. Some gaming platforms are particularly vulnerable. If you have a kid in your life, chances are they're on Discord. If you've never heard of Discord, I need you to find out about that. Roblox, which is a little kid gaming platform, has been found to have a lot of infiltration from hate groups trying to reach out to kids as young as 8 or 9. There is the YouTube algorithm that if we let it autoplay, if we let it auto suggest, its suggestions get kind of wild. Music subcultures are a long-standing recruiting avenue. More recent ones include MMA, mixed martial arts. Dr. Cynthia Miller-Idris has an excellent book called Hate in the Homeland, where she dives into mixed martial arts as fertile ground for alienated young white males to find community, which can then be steered in other directions. I'm jotting some questions in the chat. Thank you, Carol. I'll get to that in a bit. Podcasts as well. One of the things that we hear a lot from kids is they are quoting and citing podcasters. And I don't just mean provocateurs like Joe Rogan, but that can be part of it. I mean like full-blown extremist podcasts, because it's 2022. Everybody's got a podcast. For parents, one of my top suggestions is ask your kids what they're listening to, watching. Sit and watch vapid Minecraft YouTube videos with them, painful as it might be. Listen to a podcast together in a car. If they're listening to a bunch of bands that you didn't know they listened to before, ask what they are. I've watched some painfully bad YouTube videos with my 12-year-old son, and I've watched entire anime series with my 16-year-old son, just because it's really important to me to know the media that they're consuming. It might seem like an obvious suggestion, but it's a great start. Teachers can do the same thing. Ask your students, what is that shirt that you're wearing? And not in a menacing policing way, just I'm genuinely interested in what my students are into. Ronnie, I see a great question in the chat. Isn't it true there's a lot of recruitment also at colleges by both sides of these arguments? There are organizations that are establishing official and unofficial chapters at and around colleges, yes. And a lot of them are now branching down to high schools and in some cases junior highs. I think I may have it on a later slide to talk about Turning Point USA, but if I don't, I'm going to make a note to do that in the chat. But I'm also keeping an eye on the clock. Teachers, bell to bell, am I right? So how serious is this, especially in the era of COVID? Those of us who do work around white nationalist organizing and youth spaces all teamed up when everyone went remote, because we knew kids were going to be spending a lot more time alone and a lot more time on screens and online. And that absolutely terrified us, because we were already kind of fighting an uphill battle against what kids were exposed to online. Now it was going to ramp up. And we did see a lot more engagement with racist memes and podcasters and sites and vloggers when kids were at home so much. Combine that with the increased political polarization that's happened in general over the last few years, it's made this a very favorable environment for recruitment. Additionally, backlash to racial justice movements, backlashes to the protests of 2020 and beyond are showing up at school. The demonization of Black Lives Matter and all related efforts from 2020 up to this very minute. That's what is walking into school board meetings and screaming about critical race theory. That's an outgrowth of a backlash to 2020. And the more recent emergences that we've seen, storming school board meetings, demanding curriculum transparency to a pretty frightening extent. I think it was Indiana, and maybe one of my Indiana people can tell me, Indiana almost passed a law where teachers had to submit a full detailed curriculum for the entire next school year by June so that parents could review it over the summer and object to any texts. That law almost passed. I think the only reason it didn't is because Indiana already has a teacher shortage. But those are some of the pushbacks and demands being made in the name of protecting children, but really as backlashes to 2020 and as ways to kind of push out authors of color and any progressive ideas and any discussion of I don't know, just about anything in schools. I think we're up to 28 schools now, although I haven't checked lately, have some sort of legislation on the books against teaching critical race theory. And now we've scooted right along from that panic to a transphobic panic that a lot of folks are seeing in their communities. And it's impacting every element of school life, including already existing struggles with teacher retention. Here's a slide that I have in my presentation every time, and I try to update it according to groups to which I'm speaking, and there are now just too many headlines to keep up with. I could probably make a deck of these slides of headlines that have happened in the last 2 weeks. This is happening everywhere, and it's happening at every level of schooling, and it's happening from all of the angles that we've discussed. So I have a couple of quotes from, I'm going to say, either overt white nationalists or thinly veiled white nationalists. And I want to use the chat here too. I'm going to open up the deluge of the chat. I love the chat. Here's a quote. Asked whether he would disavow a goal of maintaining or expanding a European American majority in the United States, Bob Dane said, "For many, the question of whether a country loses its majority status is a fair question. Can I ask my participants to weigh in the chat about how this quote expresses white nationalist ideology?" This is what teachers call wait time. Take a shot in the chat. What is it about this quote? For many, the question of whether a country loses its majority status is a fair question. How is this expressing white nationalist sentiment? Or if you want to weigh in on what strategy he's using to disguise it, I'm interested in that too. I'm going to sip some more water while you type. Ooh, nice, Peggy. How can it be fair? Fair to whom? Fair how? Don says, leaves the door wide open, almost encouraging a negative response. It actually, Don, that's a really good point, because it presumes that a change in demographics is automatically a bad thing. Rick says it legitimizes the issue. Yep. I'm going to see if anybody gets more specific on this, but Rick, you are like walking right up to my biggest problem with this quote. Country status equals European American. Yeah, that's that. Thanks, Todd. That's that white nationalist idea that white is the default setting. Nice. You've chosen to look a very narrow view of the world. Yeah, thank you, David. Yep. Nice. Thank you. Majority seems to be a buzzword for white dominance. Ding, ding. And he's couching his personal white nationalist goal by acting like it's other people who need it. Nice. The word loses shows bias. Yep. Ooh, you all are good. Nice job. He's making it sound normal to want to maintain the majority. Yes. Good. Assumes we have a homogenous country. Ruth, I just taught my sophomores in American literature the word homogenous and homogeneity and all forms of it, and they felt very smart for having that word in their arsenal. Yes, it is replacement theory. Thank you, Alan. A nation will always have a majority and not always white. Yes, this is why, by the way, in our lexicon, we've stopped using the word minority to mean non-white, because we didn't quite realize it in previous years and decades, but by using the word minority to refer to non-white people, we were supporting that kind of assumption. Thanks, Anne. Yep, same, Deb. Yep, normalizing, legitimizing, you all are great. Also, this is one of my least favorite kinds of trolls. This is just asking questions guy. Do we see that? Bob Dane is like, Mom, I'm just asking questions about racism. Sometimes just asking questions guy is the most toxic troll in the chat. So keep an eye on Bob. Here's the next one. I really wanted to include a quote from a parent rights group. I didn't have to look hard. This is from a recent presentation at a Moms for Liberty conference. If you're not familiar with Moms for Liberty, it's one of several organizations who are storming school board meetings, demanding book bans, shutting down drag queen bingos. They have a really intensely transphobic and homophobic agenda, all for the good of the children. They're the ones running around calling teachers groomers for any number of things. We are in the battle for a nation, and we have to protect our children. How is Jay Richards of the Heritage Foundation espousing white nationalist ideology with this quote? We are in a battle for a nation, and we have to protect our children, from a session at Moms for Liberty called Gender Ideology in Our Schools. While you all are typing, I'm going to address Sean's question. Do you see this movement in other countries to this extent? Yes. I don't research other countries with the sort of detail that I track things in the United States, but I absolutely know that there are companion groups, especially in Canada, the UK. I'm not as familiar with Australia, but in other parts of Europe as well, yes. So, to the quote, we are in a battle for a nation, and we have to protect our children. How does that espouse white nationalist ideology in a session called Gender Ideology in Our Schools? And here come my replies. If you don't know enough teachers, let me just tell you that teachers get so excited when the chat blows up. It just gives me life. Let's see. Why aren't we in a battle for equity? Nice. Using natural fear for children's well-being to energize people. Terry, this is the key. Because who's against protecting children? Of course we want to protect children. Of course teachers should want to keep children safe. It's a huge logical fallacy, though, to attach that to the things they're attaching it to, but it's working on a lot of folks. Ooh, implies non-whites are dangerous. In this one, it's more gender and sexuality and identity based, but yep, absolutely. Based on the assumption that anything not conforming to the norm is a threat to our kids. Yes. Who is the we and who are the children? Thank you. As the faculty sponsor for my school's Gender and Sexuality Alliance, I need to protect those kids. Yeah. And for protect from what and whom? Yes. Thanks, Cindy. Sympathetic responses. Ooh, unaware of unconscious bias. Thanks, Don. Yeah, it's the we and the are. Yep. When a Jewish community creates a local, yeah. Ooh, whoa, hey, all right. Got it. Doesn't protect all our children. And that's exactly what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of my own students. And when we look at the rates of mental illness and we look at the rates of self-harm and suicide ideation, specifically among LGBTQ plus youth, man, those kids need us. And they don't need this. Assumes everyone agrees on what our nation is. Thanks, Ruth. These are great. Thank you. Anyone or anything not like the parents are a threat. That's a good one to stop on, Rick. Thank you. That's an excellent summation. Thank you for playing along, and thank you for jumping into the chat. I love hearing from people who are in these sessions. I want to talk a minute about conspiracy theories as well. This is something that has always been there, but has definitely escalated and normalized and mainstreamed in recent years. Anti-democratic groups, including white nationalist groups, but not limited to, push and benefit from conspiracy theories, many of which deeply rooted in racism and bigotry. This is where we are coming back to the replacement theory. Conspiracy theories and far-right actors capitalize on social unrest. Man, we've had a bit of that in the last few years. Anytime people are feeling unsteady, uncertain, unstable, they're vulnerable. I can't be the only one in this session that has kind of lost an extended family member to the conspiracy theories of the internet. I'm kind of short on uncles right now because a lot of them have taken some strange turns. And it is to the extent actually where we've been asked to give sessions specifically on the radicalization of older folks. Older folks have become very vulnerable, but at the same time, we have to keep our eye on students. Because when we send students out online to do research, when they are left to their own devices, as a lot were when we were learning remotely, they're exposed to a level of conspiracy theories and a normalization of conspiracy theories that we have never seen before. Oh, Deb, yeah, thank you. Good point. Thank you. So one of the biggest dangers, and we've seen this a lot with pushback against election results and kind of the tides of that have been going on ever since, is the erosion of public trust and the erosion of, this started with the fake news battle cry, and it's just escalated since. You can talk to students now, and it's hard to counter their sentiments of having no idea what information is worthwhile and what information can be trusted. One suggestion I make to every school administrator and elected official and community leader that doesn't run away fast enough is to get a certified librarian back in every school. And this is why. Our students are not learning in as much of a formal way as they used to how to vet information, and that coincides with them encountering exponentially more information. So, excuse me, sorry, end of teaching day, scratchy. Librarians, their function is the sorting of information and the vetting of sources, and we don't have them in our schools anymore. The vast majority of schools in Chicago, for example, do not have a certified librarian. We may have libraries, we may have books, but we don't have someone trained to help our students vet information. I'm gonna sip water. Now, anyone who works or lives with a teenager, I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old. The youth really do like to feel like they have some special privileged information, like they know something that you don't want them to know, or that they have discovered something, like how to rebel, that has never happened before. Seeking out alternative sources, trafficking in dicey memes. Ask your kids what memes they have on their phone. That's another good way to check in. That's a really great way that anti-democracy and other extremist groups reach kids, is they'll make young people feel like they are accessing something forbidden, something your parents wouldn't want you to know about, but it's kind of that, I don't know, I need a canned way to describe this because I gesture a lot when I do it and it feels kind of nebulous. It's knowing the thing that other people don't know. It's the kind of old-timey whispers in the hallway, except it's passed among phones now. Edgy, like edgy memes and jokes and Reddit threads. Those are appealing. And they empower our young people by kind of giving them not just an outlet, but source material that they didn't know was out there. So everyone, yeah, Peggy, that's really well said. It's being accepted in the in-group, but it's an in-group that's also an out-group, if that makes sense. Kids are weird, man. I've been working with them for 25 years. So everyone involved in the life of the school, everyone, and I mean teachers, students, admin, counselors, paraprofessionals, librarians, clinicians, community leaders, faith groups, coaches. Everybody has a part to play here. Everyone can be eyes and ears, can be support systems, can bring this conversation to the school community. And when I say bring the conversation to the school community, that's actually sometimes the hardest part. Starting these conversations in our school communities is difficult. It's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to raise their hand and say, I think we have a problem. I think something is going on here. I think our students are trafficking in some pretty sketchy ideas. How can we use art in this teaching? Heidi, I would love to get a hold of you about how to work this into art classes. Let me see if I can come back to that in the Q&A. So why a toolkit? I'm going to walk you through the basics of how the toolkit is set up, and then we're going to, yay, I will grab that, Heidi, and I'll reach out. Thank you. I'm going to walk you through the basics of how we set up the toolkit, and then I want to make sure we leave time for Q&A and for some of the things that have come up in the chat that we haven't gotten to yet. We decided to focus on middle school and high school because recruitment is aiming at that age group. Yes, this is happening in colleges. Yes, I've given talks on college campuses. Yes, people are worried about their uncles, but these groups are looking at kids. They are looking for how to recruit the next generation. So we talk about scales of expression, and we talk about some of the things we see and hear in schools. We structured the toolkit to talk about loosely escalating levels of expression and engagement, anything from graffiti, like anonymous graffiti, or the anonymous kind of sharing of images or info, all the way up to highly organized recruitment and calls to action. And the way the toolkit is divided is there's categories of scenarios. And the first one is it's anonymous, it just showed up, we don't know what to do. And the last set is either student or parent organizing efforts on behalf of anti-democracy groups. But let's talk about common defenses. When you engage in these conversations, when you confront people that would like to get traction in our school communities or in our communities as a whole, you will encounter some very common defenses. Here are 6 of them. And you can see these. I don't want to read you every bullet point. Anybody heard these before? Maybe run into these as you're having these conversations and as you're talking about how to deal with these issues? Yep. We actually updated. So this is all just cancel culture by the woke mob. That used to be, this is all, I can't remember what we called it, but it used to be social justice warriors. Remember when we were social justice warriors? Now we're the woke mob. In the toolkit, we have more detailed ways to respond to this kind of pushback, all the ways to break down the logical fallacies involved in these common defenses. It's not only one of my favorite parts of the resource, it was one of the most therapeutic to write, if I'm being honest, because I hear this stuff all the time. Best practices. So now we're getting into the stuff that we can take with us right back into our communities and our schools. Without getting into too much detail about specific scenarios, here are the kind of absolute best general ideas. First of all, don't wait until something happens. Too often we're reactive when there are so many ways to be proactive. And I'll talk a little more about proactive steps in a second. One of the best things, I don't know if I have any school admins in here, but even if I have some educators as well, clearly articulate the values of your school in your mission statement, your vision statement, and your policies. Some of the best responses I've seen from schools to attempts at encroachment by white nationalism is to lean on the values that are already there, is to go to stated norms and policies and mission and vision. Best practice, keep the conversation going. Don't only talk about this when something has happened. Have standing committees, have a student voice committee, have a culture and climate team at your school. Engage, if you're part of a faith group, engage in these conversations within your faith community as well. That has helped strengthen communities against when these incidents happen before they happen. Also, best practice when something has happened, be transparent. Way too often, schools and communities respond with, it's one of my least favorites, this isn't who we are. And then the event is presented as something completely outlying and it never fully gets addressed, because if it's not who we are, then we don't have to deal with it. That's a well-intentioned but awful response. We need to be transparent and say, if this is happening in our community, here it is. So let's handle it in more detail and with more thought. And lastly, we think it's a best practice to engage law enforcement sparingly. I'm generally not a fan of criminalizing kids, even the kids whose beliefs we find distasteful or even disgusting. When we criminalize, can end up, or when we overpunish to any extent, we can end up driving a young person further into these extremist movements. So we need to think very carefully about immediately responding with the harshest punishment available to us, because that backfires often. Here are some proactive steps that school communities, faith groups, community groups, library communities, they've been under attack a lot lately as well. Foster and support strong student organizations, involve parents all the time so that you have a strong parent community and a strong parent group in case for example, a parent rights organization decides to dust things up. Maintain strong ties to the wider community. So if you're a school, maintain good relationships with your elected officials, your community groups, your faith groups, park districts, libraries. We all need to be in the conversations together if we're going to handle these events, these incidents, these efforts effectively. And lastly, again, this kind of goes along with what I said about this isn't who we are. When a student brings something to us, for those of us who work in and around schools or with youth, by the time a student tells an adult that something has happened, all the kids know it happened. We know that, right? Like adults are usually the last to know. So when a student brings something to us, we have got to take them seriously and we've got to involve them in the conversation from then on. Because again, if one adult has heard about it, almost every kid has already. I am keeping an eye on the time, by the way. And so if it feels like I'm zipping through slides a little bit, hang in there. I'm going to get to my Q&A in a minute. I wanted to share a couple of success stories because, oh, look, can you give examples when this worked? I got you. Here are a couple of recent success stories, as in within the last year, to efforts to disrupt and dismantle communities. Here in Chicago, Taft High School had maybe one of the best responses I've ever seen to an attempt at infiltration by what a lot of us consider to be an extremist group. There is a group called Turning Point USA that has some documented ties to overt white nationalists. They themselves maintain that they are a political advocacy group, got some really dicey affiliations. And they have set up chapters at a whole lot of colleges. If you want to get nervous, go look at the map of their chapters on their website. Not right now, though. They tried to open up at Taft High School here in Chicago. It was their first attempt, I believe, at a Chicago public high school. And Taft fended off that attempt by saying, here's our policy on student organizations. Here's our mission statement and our vision statement. And this organization, excuse me, conflicts with that. So this won't be happening. Full stop. And that was it. And they got the backing of Chicago Public Schools in their response, which meant that no other Chicago public high school was going to give them any different of a result. And that was the last we heard of Turning Point USA in the Chicago Public Schools. But it happened really fast. It was a kind of concerted effort by some pretty active and loud voices in that kind of circle here in Chicago. And we all kind of felt blindsided. And then Taft responded beautifully by leaning on their stated values, by looking to their existing policies, and by responding as a whole school community. It's pretty great. Also, I've included, excuse me, specific to the kind of school board storming efforts that we've seen lately. In a really conservative county in Georgia, there was a political action committee that wanted to take over the school board and speak against quote unquote critical race theory and eliminate diversity education and social emotional learning and inclusion programs. And despite the voting demographics of that county, the incumbents won their seats handily by pushing back against these efforts as a community and leaning on their shared values and speaking to their neighbors about how this is not the direction they want their schools to go. And it was a really great case of community, I don't know, what are the words I'm looking for? Sorry, it's almost 3 o'clock Chicago time, so my words are disappearing. It was a great community conversation. Oh my gosh, we made it to the Q&A. I was aiming for 10 or 15 minutes and we have 11. How do we get the toolkit? Sean, I'm so glad you asked. Hang on. That is, it might even be in the next slide, but I might need to skip ahead a couple. Let me find that information for you and leave it. There it is. You can get a PDF of the toolkit for free at westernstatescenter.org/schools. You can also reach out to Adrian Vandervalk, who is my colleague at the Western State Center, who handles all the requests for toolkits. There is a Train the Trainer event coming up if you would like to bring this resource to your community, your school, your faith group that Adrian can get you into. We also have hard copies of the toolkit. However, We really did just update it for a third edition that's going to be coming out, I think, in a matter of weeks, if not a month or two. So while you can get a hard copy of the second edition, we have an expanded edition coming out to cover a lot of the changes. Yes, can someone please put the link in the chat for me while I scroll back? Thank you, Todd. So that is how to get that. Here are some also next steps that you can do right now. Thank you, Deb. Thank you. With that, we have just under 10 minutes, and I know I zipped through a fair amount of information in less than an hour at the end of a long day of teaching, and I appreciate you joining us. I appreciate your patience with a teacher at the end of her workday. And I appreciate you engaging with an issue that is maybe not everyone's idea of a fun topic on their lunch hour, or whatever time it might be where you are. This isn't what we do for fun. This is what we do because we care about our communities. And someone's got to start the uncomfortable conversations. All right, I'm going to look to the chat for questions. And if there's been any questions deposited in the Q&A, I've got so many windows open in front of me. Could someone transfer those to the chat?
Sure. Actually, Nora, can I want to read one to you that came in through the
Yes.
Q&A that I think would be great to address.
Sure. And then Wayne, I see yours. I'm going to get to that one next. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. It comes from David, and it says, in Port Townsend, which is outside of Seattle, it said, in Port Townsend, transphobia has opened the door to Proud Boys, Threepers, etc. Some people on, quote, our side are still saying we should just ignore them and they'll go away. How do we get them to recognize the seriousness of the threat?
That's a really great question. And the links among, I find like reputable sources here, we're coming back to this idea about vetting sources. I find reputable sources that connect this to that. When I helped Taft High School address the issue of Turning Point coming in, because there was a lot of like, oh, this isn't that bad. No, it's that bad. And so here are some reputable, recognizable sources documenting the connections among these groups and to violent extremism. Because I'll say this, I've sometimes had trouble getting schools to acknowledge danger, but when we see connections to groups that have committed acts of both isolated and mass violence, it stops being an argument. I mean, David, I hope that helps. Just document, and then hand over that documentation and say like, this is dangerous. This is dangerous on an immediate and daily basis. I want to go back to the term woke seemed to come from nowhere. Can you give a clear definition? I don't know if I can give a clear definition because it's been so co-opted. It's a term that was taken from Black vernacular, as so many things are, and then co-opted and morphed and mutated to be an insult. Tolerance is another word that folks have co-opted. Multiculturalism, like a lot of the terms used to describe the values that we hold highly, then get flipped and turned into insults. I mean, it's an insult to call someone liberal or progressive. So I think it's just a really strong example of especially taking a term from Black vernacular English and turning it against folks. Now it's become code. It's become code for anything that, you know, goes against like ultra conservative media outlets. I hope that helps, Wayne. Can the comments in chat be released? So that's not up to me. I'm going to leave that to my facilitators. Ronnie says, I worked at a school where incidents were kept hidden or tried to be, and that causes more harm. Agree. But that's a hard one, Ronnie, that's a hard one to sell to admins because part of an administrator's job is to keep their school name out of the news. No school wants to be the school with the Nazi problem. No school wants to be the one that is suddenly being talked about because this thing happened. Staff who said anything were retaliated against. Oh, that is rough. How do you recommend dealing with that? So Ronnie, I'm going to openly admit, here's a way that I'm actually very, very fortunate. I'm part of a school system that has a very strong union. I'm a member of the Chicago Teachers Union. And because of that, I know that my job is not at risk for giving this presentation. I know that the work I do outside of school does not put me at risk. And I don't have a simple, easy answer for teachers who are not in that position, who do not have the protection of a labor union. I know it's not as easy as saying, well, just organize a union. There are states where that's incredibly difficult. I think the more teachers are together on it, the better. Because even if you're not officially a union, if you can get most of the people in your building or your school community to acknowledge that this is a crucial issue, then you have a stronger stance with admin when they're trying to squash it. I'm going to scroll down and try to get to a couple more of these questions via Facebook. I always worry about the balance between individual safety of teens and their desire to stand up. Thank you, Julia. That's a great one. We need to support our students and acknowledge that when a student brings something forward, or when they've even been a bystander to an incident, we need to protect and support and follow up and provide care. That's why I always advise involving the social worker, the counseling office, any wellness staff you have to support students, including students who may have perpetuated these acts, who may have shared the meme, who may be dabbling in extremist ideology. That's why we don't try to punish it out of our schools. We need to support students, even the ones that are scaring us. Thank you. Critical race theory and critical theory. Yes, similar. I don't know if there's a way to answer that one in 90 seconds, but yes, critical race theory is another one that's become code, kind of like woke. Wondering how this info intersects with ethnic studies framework development. I would have to dig in more information on that. I know that one of the first indicators we had of this movement is when folks took aim at ethnic studies programs in Arizona. And that was a while ago. But I don't know if I'm speaking specifically to that issue. In the program is facing history being done? So facing history has to be brought to schools by educators. It's still robust and alive and well. They have some wonderful materials, I agree. You are welcome for the presentation. I'm really, really thrilled that I could be here and that it worked out with my schedule. Oh my gosh, it's 2:58. Rick, I'm gonna also acknowledge, yes, DEI, any DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion at any level of school is seeing that pushback for sure, including with hiring. Oh my gosh, I got through the questions.
Nora, you have been so fabulous. Really, really fantastic. Thank you so much. And let me tell you all who are watching today, I really encourage you to go download this toolkit. It is top notch and has so many very practical responses for specific situations. You can find outlines, you can find things that you can actually do, ways to respond, and it gives you examples so that you really have some things that you can practice and consider. Not everyone is good at thinking on their feet or figuring out how to respond, and it's a very practical guide. So Nora, you've just done an amazing job putting this resource together, and also in this presentation, your ability to engage the chat is just an A++. Thank you so much.
Thank you, remote teaching. I'm just going to say one more time, thank you to everybody who jumped onto this Zoom and engaged and listened and asked questions and gave feedback. I love that I can have these conversations with people all over the country. Thank you so much for making this conversation possible.
Thank you, Nora. And we will be sending out this information as well. Or if you have questions, please feel free to email us at the Holocaust Center and we can share them with Nora. Also, if you had questions that you didn't get answered or things that come up later, we're happy to pass them on. And thank you again, Nora, for being with us today.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
One of the biggest compliments you all can give us is to share this program with a friend, a colleague, or a family member. You can send them a link to the recorded program or invite them to join live on a future Tuesday, or share it on your social media pages. This helps others to find our programs and helps us to share this really important information. This program was recorded and you'll find it on our website starting tomorrow. And please join us for our next Lunch and Learn program on October 18th, entitled A Great Experiment in Educating Teenage Refugees, the Case of a Swedish International School, with Dr. Bernice Lerner. Our Lunch and Learn programs are possible because of all of you and because we have a fantastic team at the Holocaust Center. Thank you to Julia Thompson and Morgan Romero on our education team who are running the technical side of this show behind the scenes. And as always, a huge thank you to our CEO, Dee Simon, and the rest of our passionate team, Richard Green, Lori Warshall-Cohen, Paul Regelbrug, Jessica Michaels, Amanda Davis, Devin Shirelocky, Katie Lawrence, and Brenda Anderson. Thank you again to everyone for joining today's program. We hope to see you at our next Lunch and Learn on October 18th. And this concludes our program for today.